When it's time to edit an image, here are some tools that every Photoshop user needs to be familiar with. The Levels tool is really the key to understanding how Photoshop manipulates pixels when you edit an image. Let's open up a file, Control-O on the PC, Command-O on the Mac. We're inside our Chapter 3 folder and we're going to open the file Full Range. Now in the last chapter we turned rulers on. We're going to turn them off. Up in the View menu, scroll down to where it says Rulers and select it. Now when we made our custom workspace, we included a histogram panel. So let's click on it to open it up, and let's make two quick changes. Here in the flyout panel in the far right, I want you to set it to Expanded View, and to the right of Channels, instead of Colors, let's set the histogram to Luminosity. Now the histogram is a graph that shows the distribution of pixels in your image based on one thing only: brightness. So it shows you how many pixels reside at a particular level of brightness. The far left end of the histogram is reserved for maximum deep dark shadows. The far right end of the histogram is reserved for complete super duper blown out whites. Remember that Photoshop works on a level of 0 to 255 in terms of image brightness. So let's see how that translates to this image of the waterfall. If we start over here on the left, down at a level of about 3, and note that we have here level and count. I want you to pay attention to those. We have no pixels at this location. There's no data here in the graph. It's all empty. But as we move over to, say, a level of 25, we start to get some pixels. 25 is a relatively dark tone. As we move over to the right, just underneath where this peak is, at a level of about 60, 61, we can see that's where we have the greatest number of pixels in this image. And we've actually, if you look at count, we've got 3,260 pixels residing at that level. As we move over to the right, we're heading towards our mid-tone areas. Now we're at a level of 128, and we have a small little peak there, a little hump. We've got 818 pixels at that mid-tone level. And as we move over here along the right, another little hump comes down, tapers off nicely, so that by the time we get over here to a level of 250, we have no pixels occupying that range. So the histogram is really just a diagram of where our pixels fall in terms of brightness. Now there's no such thing as a perfect histogram. Each image is going to have its own unique shape. Let's open up a few. Control-O on the PC, Command-O on the Mac. This time we're going to open up multiple images. So I'm going to click Shadow down here at the bottom. And now I'm going to hold the Control key on the PC. On the Mac, it'll be the Command key. I'm going to Control-Command-Click on Mid, Control-Command-Click on Highlight, and Control-Command-Click on Clipping. We're going to open up 4 files at the same time. With those selected, I simply press the Return key, and Photoshop is going to open up all 4 files. Now this shadow image, this is highlighted in the tab, so that's the image we're looking at. Look at the shape of its histogram. It's bunched all the way over to the left. That means that we have the greatest number of pixels devoted to the darker range of brightness. And you can see the image is a dark image. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that it has a lot of dark pixels. If we go and click on the tab that says Highlight, open that image up, we'll see that we have almost the reverse. We have no pixels at the shadow end, no pixels in the mid-tone area. All the pixels are bunched over to the right. Let's take a look at a third image. Let's click on the tab called Mid. And let's see what that image looks like. Here, the bulk of our pixels are in the mid-tone range. They're all bunched up in the middle of the histogram. So really the histogram is image dependent. It's going to change depending on what image you're looking at. There is one thing, however, that you don't ever want to see. Let's go and open up this file called Clipping. You can see at the far right of that histogram, we have for the first time a slender peak that butts right up against the right end of the histogram. That means that pixels have been clipped, or there's no data for them. That's the one thing that we do want to avoid with a histogram. In this image, the greatest number of pixels is residing at that maximum level, that would be 255, and if a pixel is at 255, it's just pure white. There's no detail, no information. And we can see in the image that corresponds to this area here with our blown out sky. There's no detail, no information in there, and that's a situation that we'd like to avoid at all costs. Similarly, if you had an image where that peak butted right up against the left edge for the shadows, then you'd have plugged up shadows with no detail. So those are really the only two scenarios we want to avoid with the histogram. Otherwise, just get used to the fact that different images are going to have different shapes in the histogram. If this warning icon in the histogram panel has been bugging you for the past 6 minutes, you can simply click to update the cache that Photoshop is using to display the histogram. Click and it's gone. The histogram is updated. Now let's jump to the Levels tool. We're going to click on Full Range, open up Image, Adjustments, and the Levels tool. We've got our Levels dialog box here. Notice that in the Levels dialog we have the histogram. So let's close this histogram panel. We don't need to see it twice. In this Levels dialog box we've got 3 sliders beneath the histogram. One at the left for the shadows, a gray one in the middle for the midtones, and one on the far right for the highlights. And this is how the Levels tool works. We move these sliders. Right now in this image, any pixel indicated by a graph in the histogram that resides above where this slider is pointing is going to be set to maximum black. So if I drag this over to the right, I have set all of these pixels directly above it to be maximum black. If these pixels above it are maximum black, any pixels that initially were residing to the left are also going to be maximum black. And let's move this out of the way so you can see what it does to the image. Not only does it darken the shadows, it destroys the unique pixel values of a lot of areas in this image. Here, we'll slide it back out. This is where we started. As we drag this to the right, any pixel value that was here is now maximum black. So before we had a distinction between pixels that were darker, pixels that were even darker. Now they have all been set to the same value. I'll slide this back out. Same thing will happen on the highlight end. If we click this highlight slider and drag it over to the left, now any pixels that are residing directly above this are set to maximum white, meaning any pixels that were brighter than that initially are also set to maximum white. So this is actually clipping colors and throwing away unique pixel information, setting them all, in this case, to maximum white. This middle slider indicates where a pixel is going to be at a middle brightness value. So if we drag it to the left, the image brightens because now these pixels, which were dark, are now at a middle level of brightness. If we drag this slider to the right, the image gets darker because these pixels, which were bright, have now been brought down to a middle level of brightness. And that's how you use the Levels tool. You can quickly change the brightness and darkness of the entire image just by moving those 3 sliders. The Curves tool, while a bit harder to wrap your head around, offers a degree of precision and control that is unrivaled in Photoshop. Let's start with a new image. Control-O on the PC, Command-O on the Mac to open. In our Chapter 3 folder, we are going to open the image titled Curves. Now this is going to open up by default in our standard screen view. Let's go up to the Applications bar and we're going to select Full Screen Mode with Menu Bar. We could also use our handy shortcut F key to do this. Now we're going to go to Image, Adjustments, and Curves. And this is why we switch to screen mode. Over the image, I'm going to press the space bar to invoke the hand key. You remember that from lesson 2, right? We're going to move this over here so that we can see both the image and the curves dialog box at the same time. Now there's an option here I want you to set in Curve Display Options. I want you to click and open that up. Drag this box up to the top. Under Show, I'd like for you to turn off the check mark for intersection line. We don't want to really confuse ourselves with too many things to look at one time, but do make sure that under Show Amount Of, you have the radio button set for light. This will give us our 0 to 255 numbers that we've been talking about all along. So we can close this options box now. In the Curves dialog window, first thing you're likely to notice is that we have a histogram behind it. So this should look very familiar to us. We have a triangle on the left and one on the right, again very similar to what we saw in the Levels tool. And Curves is oriented in the same way. Shadows are on the far left, highlights are on the far right. Every curve starts with a diagonal line that represents no change to the image. Now let's see how this tool works. we're going to go click on the On Image Adjustment tool. That's this finger hand icon with the up and down arrows. We're going to click on it to select it. And as I hover the mouse around the image, I'm not clicking, I'm not dragging, I'm simply hovering over the image. Note that in the main window of the Curves dialog, we have a hollow circle that is moving along that diagonal line. That hollow circle represents the brightness value of the pixel located directly underneath my cursor. So as I'm moving up in here in the clouds, you can see that that hollow circle is to the right side towards the highlights. But if I move my cursor down into these shadow areas, you can see that hollow circle now has drifted down to the left end of the histogram. So here we're focusing on shadow pixels. If I move it up here, we're focusing on highlights. So it's very important to note that this is a live update and will continuously track where you're moving the mouse. When we want to edit the image, we simply click, and notice that when we click on the image area, we have this hand icon with the up and down arrows, but in the Curves dialog box, that hollow circle has now turned into a solid black square. That means that point is selected, and if we drag up with the mouse, we're holding the mouse down and dragging up, we are brightening the image, and look at what happens to our curve. Now, in the Curves window, we have changed the shape of this curve. We have raised it up above where this original diagonal line was. Whenever the curve goes above the line, those pixels are being brightened, and you can see that we brightened the image. If I were to go and drag this curve down, and as you can see, I can simply click to select a point, drag this down, the image gets darker. Look at the shape of the curve. It's now fallen below the diagonal line. I want you to pay attention too between the distance from the original diagonal to where we have made our new curve shape. Up in the highlights, you can see that the curve has bent below the original line, but by a relatively small amount. There's not so much of a difference up here between our new curve and the original. Whereas you can see as we get down into the midtones, and especially down around in this region, we have a much greater amount of space, which means a much greater change in brightness. In this case, a change in darkness. So that's how we work with the Curves tool. We simply use this On Image tool. We cycle it over a part of the image. We can see that hollow circle, and we click up or down to brighten or darken the image. Now, if that's all we could do to curves, it wouldn't really be that much more useful than levels. But the fantastic thing about the Curves tool is that we can select and move multiple points. I'm going to go here, click on this point, and I'm going to drag it out of the window area to delete it. With our On Image tool selected, we're going to go up in the Clouds area. And I'm going to take a cloud area here. Notice my hollow circle is over in the highlight range. I'm going to click and drag up a little bit. That looks pretty good. Of course, the whole image is brightened now, but here's where the magic of curves comes into play. I can go down here into my shadow areas. I'm way down to the left end of the Curve dialog window. I'm going to click and drag down. Down a little bit more, right about there. Now notice what has happened. In the shadow region, I have pulled my curve down below the original diagonal, so those pixels have gotten darker, while in my highlight end, my curve is above the original diagonal, meaning those pixels have gotten brighter. So I've done two separate things to the image. The bright pixels I've made brighter, and the dark pixels I have made darker. And notice the shape of our curve. It's fairly shallow, but it's still an S shape. I could enhance it a little bit more. I'll click here, open this up a bit, and maybe click down here and pull those shadows down a little bit so you could really see it look like an S shape. This will be a very familiar shape to you as you work with images in Photoshop, because this is the way to enhance contrast, to add contrast to an image. An S-shaped curve means that your highlights have gotten brighter and your shadows have gotten darker. What we've done so far is taken a few minutes of explanation, but in actual practice we're really looking at just a few seconds of work. Let's take a look at the preview by toggling it on and off to see just how far we've come. If I uncheck preview, here's where we started, a flat, low contrast, uninteresting, dull image. With just 2 points on the curve, however, we quickly go to a much fuller, richer, and dynamic image. And that's part of the beauty of working with the Curves tool. So far we've talked about changing the brightness or luminance of pixels. Now we're going to look at how to change actual colors. We're going to open up a file in our Chapter 3 folder, Control O on the PC, Command O on the Mac. And in this Chapter 3 folder, we are going to open Saturation. Pull that up on the screen. And like we did in the previous lesson, we are going to change the screen view to full screen with menu bar. So we can do that up here in the screen view switcher, full screen mode with menu bar. This is going to let us move it out of the way once we call up the HueSaturation dialog box. To get to that, we go to Image, Adjustments, and HueSaturation. We'll move this over here. Again, the space bar to temporarily invoke the hand tool. We'll slide this image over and move the HueSaturation dialog box there. Now, when we talk about hue, we need to really understand what we mean. Hue we can think of as color. Saturation, on the other hand, is the intensity of the color. So we can have a single hue, a single color, and we can have that at various levels of intensity or various levels of saturation. Now, the HueSaturation tool is fairly straightforward. We've got a hue slider, a saturation slider, and a lightness slider. For now, we're just going to concentrate on the first two. When we're set to the master mode like this, we can simply go, take the hue slider, drag it to the left, the image is going to get warmer. If we drag it to the right, the colors are going to get cooler. So that's pretty straightforward, but not very useful. There aren't that many times when you would want to just take the hue slider and drag it all the way to the right. One thing you will do more often, though, is adjust the saturation. If you wanted to add more saturation to this image, you drag this slider to the right. If you wanted to take saturation out, you drag it to the left. And if you dragged it all the way, you would take all of the color completely out of that image. Going to hit 0 here to set our saturation back to no change. But here's the great thing about this tool. Just like we did in Curves, we have an on-image adjustment tool. And if we click on it to highlight it and move the mouse over the image, we'll click on any particular color. Let's say I'm going to click on this green leaf, for example. Notice that the cursor changes into our hand icon, and this time the arrows go left to right. So if I simply click and drag to the left, notice that I am taking the saturation out, but I am only taking the saturation out of the color that I have clicked on, in this case the green leaves. So we're leaving a bunch of color in the petals and in the background, but these green leaves are losing saturation. We could drag it the other way to greatly saturate that, and we can quickly end up in a big old mess, but you can go any direction and you can isolate your change to a particular color by using the On Image tool. Now let's set that saturation back to 0. And how would we adjust the hue with this tool? Well, again, with the On Image Adjustment tool selected, we're going to click on an area of the image, but this time we're going to use a modifier key, Control on the PC, Command on the Mac, and if we Control Command click, now we'll notice that it's not the saturation that's changing, it is the hue. So we can change these leaves to a warmer hue, we could change these leaves to a cooler hue. So again, we've got a quick, fast, and easy way to isolate particular colors just by using the On Image Adjustment tool. I'm going to reset this value in the hue from 97 back to 0, and we can further refine the choices of colors that get moved and colors that do not get moved. On Image tool is selected down here. We're going to move over to the petals of the flower, click, and drag to the left. Now that's desaturating the petals, leaving the other colors alone. But suppose there are colors in this image that we would like to include in that desaturation effect. Well, if we look at the HueSaturation dialog box, we've got 3 eyedroppers here down at the bottom, and I want you to pay attention to the last 2. One has a plus sign, one has a minus sign. We're going to click on this plus sign. We've got our add eyedropper, and if I go here to a different region of the image, let's say this background, this color is different enough from the petals of the flowers that it did not get moved. But if I simply click with the add eyedropper, it now expands the range of colors that are selected to include that background area, so that is automatically now desaturated to the same level as the petals of our flowers. So that's a great way to expand the range of colors that you want to desaturate in this case. If we wanted to take colors out of that range, we can simply go and choose the minus eyedropper tool, and we can simply click. Let's go back on this background area, and we'll simply click the minus sign, and look at that. That's taking those colors out of our desaturation effect. Again, limiting it to the petals of the flowers. So you've got a lot of flexibility and precision here in the HueSaturation dialog box. Let's take a look at how to crop and straighten an image. We're going to start with a file. We're going to open a file in our Chapter 3 folder. Let's go this time to the image titled Crop. We'll bring that up on screen. The tool we're going to use is named, appropriately enough, the Crop tool. That's located here in the Tool panel. The shortcut command for this is the letter C. And the easiest way to use Crop is simply click and drag on an image. Once I let it go, I'm not committing to the crop. I can further refine this. I could say, well, that's a little bit too high, I'll bring it down. We could bring this out on the side, and we can move it freely anywhere we want in the image. Notice a few things in the options bar. We've got a crop guide overlay. Mine is set to none. Yours might be set to rule of thirds, for example, which breaks the image up into grids. There's a finer grid called grid, so you're free to use any of these you want. For now, I'm going to leave it set to none. We have a shield color. We'll toggle this off, and you can see that the shield color applies a separate overlay to the area that is going to be removed, the area that is going to be cropped out. That's helpful. It gives you a little visual idea of what your image is going to look like by blocking out the material that you're going to crop. We can choose a color for that shield. Right now it's set to black, and it has an opacity of 75%, which is great because we can still see through it in case we need to make fine-tuning adjustments. Now if we go, I'll drag this out to the bottom. To commit to this crop, you can simply press the return or enter key on the keyboard, or on the PC we can right-click, control-click on the Mac and select crop. And there we have our crop. I'm going to undo this with Control-Z on the PC and Command-Z on the Mac, because there's something else I want to show you. We just did a freeform crop, but suppose you want to crop to a specific ratio or perspective. In the width and height box, I'm going to type in numbers. For the width, I'll put in a 4, and for the height, I'll put in a 5. Now, when I drag with the crop tool, I am automatically constrained to a 4:5 proportion. So if I had to fit this for a magazine layout, for example, and their pages were spec'd for a 4:5 ratio, I could automatically crop to that perspective and know that my image is going to fit. I'm going to cancel out of this with a right click on the PC, control click on the Mac. Now, those of you who've been paying attention, I'll zoom into this a little bit more, may notice that this image is not level, it is not straight. When you use the crop tool, I'll draw it again, you have the option, if you move the cursor over one of the corners, you get this double bent arrow tool, and that lets you adjust the crop and move it, and you can use that to straighten out an image, but it's a very imprecise method. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to go back to the tool panel, and we're going to choose the ruler tool. The ruler tool is hidden underneath this eyedropper tool. So we'll go here and select ruler. Now this is great because we simply click on something that should be straight. I'm going to use the top edge of this building. I'm going to click on the left corner and drag over towards the right corner. I've now drawn a line over an item that should be straight but that is currently crooked. In the tool options bar, I have a straighten button. If I click straighten, watch what happens. It not only straightens the image, it crops off the excess area of the image that it had to do to eliminate any white spaces. So that's a great, easy, one-step way to straighten an image and crop it at the same time. If you don't want the image to be straightened and cropped all in one step, here's a little trick. You can hold down the Alt key on the PC, Option key on the Mac, while you press the straighten button, and the image will only be straightened. It will not be cropped. You'll end up with something that looks like that, and you can crop it manually. We can make an image appear warmer or cooler by adjusting the color balance. Photoshop offers two tools that make this a snap. Let's open up an image. We're going back to our Chapter 3 folder, and we're going to open up our old friend, the garden image that we first saw in Chapter 1. Now, there are two ways that we can adjust the color balance. The first way is in the Image menu, Adjustments, and we'll go down to Photo Filter. Now, this brings up a preset selection of filters that mimic what photographers used to carry out into the field with them. We're starting here with a warming filter, but if we click on the pull-down menu, we've got 3 warming filters here to choose from. I'll choose warming filter 81. That should give us a good difference, and I'll toggle off the preview. There's where we started. Here's that warming filter. We could also go cooler. I'll go down here and select cooling filter 82 for example, and you can see, here's the preview off, here's the preview on, you can see just how far we can go with these filters. Now within these preset filters, you can adjust their strength by moving the density slider. If you drag the density slider to the left, you are decreasing the effect of that filter. If you drag it to the right, you're making that filter appear even stronger. So you've got a lot to play with here, and simply by clicking through this menu you can go warm to cool in just a couple of steps. Let's cancel out of this, and now we're going to look at our second method. We're going to go back to Image, Adjustments, and this time we'll select Color Balance. Now this works with 3 sliders that move between 6 primary colors. If we want to warm the image, we simply go along towards the red. In the second slider, we'll maybe move a hair towards magenta, and in the third, we'll move towards yellow. Here's the preview off. Here's it on, so you can see it definitely warms up the image. Under tone balance, we want to stay on midtones. This is going to be the most realistic approach. It's going to focus our efforts in the midtones of the image and taper off nicely into the highlights and shadows. If we wanted to cool this image, we could go towards the cyan end a little bit. Maybe we'll take a little bit of magenta out that we did, but the big one is we're going to go from yellow over to blue. And if we toggle the preview on and off here, there's where we started, and now we have a much cooler image. So we've got 2 quick and easy ways to adjust the color balance in Photoshop. Photoshop offers a great tool for converting images from color to black and white. Let's open up an image. We're going to go back to our Chapter 3 folder, and this time we're going to open up the file labeled BW, short for black and white. Now with this image on screen, what I'm going to do is select the Fit to Screen view. The shortcut for that is Control-0 on the PC, Command-0 on the Mac, to get it just a little bit bigger on our screen. And the tool we're going to use for this conversion is named, appropriately enough, Black and White. It's located in the Image menu, under Adjustments, and we'll simply scroll down and select Black and White. As soon as this dialog box opens, it gives you a default black and white conversion. I'll toggle the preview off. Here's our color information, and here's the default conversion. There's also an auto button that you can choose. If you're not happy with the default, you can see if the auto gets you to a better starting point. But for now, we can just go back to default because we're going to do all of this manually. Now in other tools that we looked at, we had an on-image adjustment tool that we had to click and select. Here in black and white, it's turned on and activated by default. So all we have to do is move our mouse over the image. I'm going to move it here over this area of the chair, and if I simply click and hold down the mouse, you can see the icon turning into the hand with left and right arrows. More importantly, in the black and white dialog box, you can see that the yellow value is highlighted. If I click and drag to the left, you can see those numbers go down, and the yellow parts of this image are getting darker. If I click and drag to the right, the yellow parts are getting brighter. Why yellow? Well, because I clicked on an item in the image that was yellow. Yellow was the underlying color information. So just because Photoshop gives you a black and white preview of the image doesn't mean it forgets the colors that were in this image. That's the beauty of the black and white tool. It lets you make image adjustments based on the underlying color information. If I go here and click on this chair, you can see that that's going to select blues primarily. So I'm going to slide this to the left to darken that blue value. Maybe I'll brighten it up a little bit. I changed my mind. I'll go a little bit brighter there. I'll select on this chair, and let's see what color is underneath there. That's red. What happens if we drag to the left? We're making those much, much darker. Notice that the yellow chair and the blue chair have been left alone. The table was also red, so that's getting darker. Let's go back here and find another color. In this foliage, let's click here and see if we can find a green color. We have green here, so we're simply going to click and let's lighten this up a bit. So we're going to open up those greens in there. And so with just a few clicks of the mouse, you can see that we can drastically alter the contrast in this image simply by changing tones based on their underlying color information. Let's go back for a minute, toggle the preview off. Here's the color information that we started, so you can see the individual discrete colors we have in the image of reds, blues, yellows, and greens, and now we've adjusted the brightness of all those values. Now there's another thing we can do with the black and white tool, is we can tint the image. Once we're happy with this black and white conversion, we can go down and click on this tint box, and let's see how this works. We've got hue and saturation. The important thing when you're working with this tool is to boost your saturation up. It has to be very high so you can see the changes that you're making in hue. We're ultimately going to come down from this, so don't worry about your colors looking exactly right. Here the saturation is very high, but that's just so we can find a nice hue. If we wanted to get a nice sort of sepia print, we'll come over here. That's a little bit too much red. We'll add a little yellow in there, something about like that. Now to make it look real, we will bring the saturation down, way down. And if we come down here just to about 7%, you can see we've got a nice sepia toned image. If we wanted a cooler image, we can take this hue and drag it over towards the blue end, get a much cooler rendering of the image, something about like that. If that looks a little bit too strong, a little bit too cold for you, we can take the saturation slider and bring that down even further, down to about 3%, so we just have a slightly cool image. So within one dialog box, we can take the image from color to black and white and even perform a tint.